Sometimes the loudest truths don't come from boardrooms or stages, they come in whispers, or sometimes in a blunt, fearless voice you never expected. Marcus Ellington, a millionaire CEO, was a man used to control. He decided when others spoke and when they stayed silent. He commanded respect with just a glance. But on a cold Friday evening, sliding into the back seat of his luxury car, he was silenced in a way he could never have imagined. Across from him sat a little black girl, no more than 8 years old. She looked him in the eye, unflinching, and told him to shut up. Marcus's world, carefully built with walls of power and pride, shook that night. He didn't know it yet, but those 2 words would unravel his past, challenge his empire, and change the man he thought he was forever. Marcus Ellington was the kind of man people admired from a distance, but rarely approached up close. At Key 52, he had everything the world could measure as success. A corner office in one of the tallest glass towers downtown. A name that appeared in financial magazines. Invitations to charity galas, not because of his heart, but because of his checkbook. He wore success like a second skin. His suits were hand-tailored, his watches precise enough to measure a heartbeat. When he entered a room, conversations shifted. Not because Marcus was loud, but because people feared disappointing him. Yet for all the power, Marcus lived in silence. His penthouse overlooked the entire city, but his nights were spent alone. He had colleagues, but no real friends, assistants, but no confidants. He had lovers once, but his marriages had burned out quickly, consumed by the same fire that drove him to succeed. The irony? Marcus hadn't been born into privilege. He had clawed his way up from the very bottom. Childhood memories. Marcus grew up in a narrow brick apartment on the south side of the city. His father had disappeared when he was 6, leaving his mother to raise 2 boys on her own. His mother, Evelyn, was a cleaner. She scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and mopped offices in tall buildings that Marcus would one day own. He remembered her hands most vividly, raw, cracked from chemicals, always smelling faintly of bleach. He remembered the nights she came home past midnight, her back stiff, her face exhausted, but trying to smile anyway. Marcus swore, as a boy lying awake on a thin mattress, that he would never live like that. He would never be invisible. He would never bend his back for anyone else. That promise fueled him like fire. The rise through scholarships, relentless ambition, and a refusal to quit, Marcus clawed his way into college. He studied business while working 2 jobs, rarely sleeping, continually moving. Professors remembered him as intense, almost frightening in his determination. When his peers went to parties, Marcus studied balance sheets. When they slept in, Marcus hustled interviews. By 30, he had started his firm. By 40, he was a millionaire. By 50, a name synonymous with power. But along the way, something shifted. The boy who once promised he would never forget the struggle had begun to ignore it. The man who once felt anger at watching his mother overlooked had started overlooking others. The present evening, that Friday evening, Marcus had just closed one of the largest deals of his career, a merger worth billions, applauded by investors. The board had congratulated him, champagne glasses raised, smiles wide. But Marcus felt nothing. Just another deal, another notch on a belt already heavy with victories. His chauffeur Daniel waited with the car outside, a sleek black sedan polished to perfection. Marcus slid into the back seat, loosening his tie, ready for silence and the comfort of tinted windows. But then, he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, small legs dangling off the seat, was a little girl, 8 years old, maybe 9, skin the color of rich mahogany, hair tied into neat braids, and eyes sharp, unafraid. Marcus blinked. He turned to Daniel, but before he could speak, the girl beat him to it. "Shut up," she said, 2 words, clear, firm, unshaken. Marcus's reaction. For a moment, Marcus thought he had misheard. A child in his car? telling him, to be quiet? He opened his mouth, outrage rising, but the girl's eyes held him in place. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet authority that startled him more than any boardroom confrontation ever had. Daniel stammered from the front. "Sir, I found her outside the building. Security thought she was lost, but she said she needed to ride with you. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I—" His voice trailed off, nervous. Marcus frowned, anger ready to burst. But again, the girl spoke first. "I said shut up. Don't talk. Just listen." Marcus stared. His instinct screamed to take control, to demand answers, but something, curiosity, confusion, maybe an echo of an old memory, silenced him. And so, for the first time in years, Marcus Ellington sat back and listened. The girl. Her name, she revealed slowly, was Ariana. But she didn't say it right away. She made Marcus wait, as if testing his patience. She didn't act lost. She didn't act scared. She worked as though she belonged there, as though Marcus's luxury sedan was the perfect stage for what she had to say. She spoke about her mother, a woman who worked late nights cleaning offices, a woman who wore the same exhaustion Marcus once saw in his own mother's face. Ariana described how her mom would come home with aching feet, sometimes skipping dinner so Ariana could eat. Marcus felt a twinge in his chest, but he ignored it. Ariana didn't just tell stories. She painted pictures, the sound of keys jingling at midnight. The smell of cleaning chemicals clung to her mom's clothes. The way her mom's smile would falter when she thought Ariana wasn't looking. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his leather seat. These details were too familiar, too close to memories he had buried beneath years of wealth. Marcus's inner battle. Part of him wanted to dismiss the girl, to call her dramatic, maybe even coached. He told himself she was just a child. What? Could she know about business, about sacrifice, about the weight of decisions? And yet, her words cut through his excuses. Every sentence reminded him of Evelyn, his mother. The nights he pretended to sleep while she cried softly in the kitchen, bills spread across the table. The mornings she went to work with her back was already sore from the day before. He hadn't thought about those nights in years. He had trained himself not to. Success demanded focus, not sentiment. But Ariana's words dragged those memories back into the light, and Marcus, the man who silenced entire rooms with a glance, found himself unable to silence a little girl. The car ride continues. The city blurred past outside. Neon lights, reflecting on tinted windows. Inside, the air grew heavier with every word Ariana spoke. She told Marcus things she shouldn't have known. About how janitors in his skyscraper were paid barely enough to survive. About how health benefits were stripped years ago in the name of shareholder value. About how her mother's name was never remembered, though she cleaned the same floors day after day. Marcus's jaw tightened. These were policies he had approved, numbers on a spreadsheet, efficiencies that had earned him praise in boardrooms, but hearing them through the voice of a child, her small voice describing her mother's exhaustion, turned those numbers into wounds. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something stir in his chest, not pride, not control, but shame. The silence in the car grew heavier with every passing second. Marcus, who usually thrived in silence, who used it as a weapon in meetings, letting others squirm until they broke first, suddenly found himself the one unsettled. Across from him, Ariana sat with her hands folded neatly on her lap. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't timid. She sat there like someone twice her age, eyes sharp, watching him, waiting. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice low, controlled. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head. "I told you already. I'm the daughter of someone you don't see." Marcus frowned. "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is," she said softly but firmly. "You don't see her. You don't see people like her. You step over them, you forget them, but you'll remember me." Her words landed like a challenge. Marcus tries to regain control. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. It was the posture he often took in negotiations. A wall of power. "Listen," he said carefully. "I don't know what game this is, or who put you up to this, but I don't have time for riddles. If you need help, I'll make sure someone takes care of it." "But this isn't the way." Ariana shook her head. "You don't get it. This is the way. The only way you'd listen." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but her gaze pinned him again. That unsettling steadiness. It was like she could see through his carefully built armor. The first story, she began to talk, not about herself, but about her mother. "My mom leaves home before the sun rises," Ariana said. "She walks to the bus stop because the car broke down months ago, and we can't afford to fix it. She works all day cleaning the offices in your buildings. Sometimes she comes home so tired she can't even eat. Sometimes she falls asleep in her uniform because she doesn't want to waste time changing." Her voice was calm, but each word was a blade. Marcus shifted, looking out the window. He told himself this wasn't new. He had heard stories like this before, read them in reports, skimmed them in charity letters. But this felt different. This wasn't a story. It was an indictment. "Do you know what it feels like," Ariana continued, "to see your mom's hands shake while she holds a spoon? Do you know what it feels like when she says, 'I'm not hungry'? But you know, she's lying because she just wants you to eat the last piece of bread." Marcus swallowed hard. Against his will, an image surfaced. Evelyn, his mother, sitting at their kitchen table decades ago, pushing food toward him and his brother, insisting she wasn't hungry. He remembered the hollowness in her eyes. He clenched his jaw. He had buried those memories deep. And now, this child was digging them up effortlessly. Marcus pushes back. "Life is hard," Marcus said finally, his voice sharp, defensive. "I know that. I lived it. Your mother has a job. She earns. She'll make it through. Everyone has to work." Ariana didn't flinch. She doesn't just work. She breaks. She breaks every day so people like you don't have to lift a finger. And you don't even know her name. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. Anger, shame, something tangled. He prided himself on being untouchable, on never letting emotions sway him. Yet this girl, this child, was unraveling him with every word. The car passes, familiar streets. As the car continued through the city, Marcus glanced outside. They were driving past neighborhoods he hadn't visited in years. Old brick buildings, worn-down grocery stores, cracked sidewalks. It hit him like a ghost from his past. This was where he came from. He remembered running down these very streets as a boy. He remembered the corner store that sold bread for $1, the one his mom stretched into 2 meals. He remembered the cracked steps of their apartment building, the sound of sirens at night. He hadn't been back in decades. He had built an empire so he would never have to look back. But here it was again, right outside his tinted window. Impossible to ignore. The second story, Ariana's voice cut through his memories. "My mom used to dream," she said quietly. "She wanted to be a nurse. She studied hard in school, but she couldn't afford college, so she cleaned instead. She said it was just for a little while, until she saved money. But then I came along and saving became impossible. Rent, food, medicine. It ate everything." She paused, her little hands tightening on her lap. "Do you know what it feels like to watch someone's dream die?" Marcus froze. He did know. He remembered his brother, James. Unlike Marcus, James hadn't made it out. He had dreams once, to be a musician, but dreams cost money. And while Marcus pushed forward, James fell back, eventually swallowed by the same poverty Marcus had escaped. Marcus rarely spoke of his brother. It was easier to pretend he had never existed, but Ariana's words cracked open that old wound. The Power struggle. Marcus leaned forward, his voice rough. Why are you telling me this? Why me? Ariana looked at him, unblinking. Because you forgot. You forgot what it feels like. You forgot the people who built the floors you walk on. You forgot the hands that keep your empire shining. And because if I don't remind you, nobody else will. Marcus inhaled sharply. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He hated it. Hated that he felt small in front of a child, but deeper than the hate was something else. Recognition. She was right. Ariana reveals. More, she told him about nights when their heat was cut off in winter because the bills piled too high. About mornings when she went to school hungry because there wasn't enough breakfast. About watching. Her mother's shoes wear thin because every dollar went to rent. Marcus's chest tightened with every sentence. He remembered his shoes with holes in the soles, stuffed with cardboard to last another winter. He remembered lying to classmates about why he never joined them for lunch. Ariana's words weren't just her story. They were his, mirrored, back through time. Marcus breaks his silence. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now. What do you want from me? Ariana tilted her head, her braids brushing her shoulders. Nothing you can buy, just for you to listen, just for you to remember. Marcus stared at her. He, who had been taught that everything had a price, couldn't comprehend it. No money? No favors? Nothing? She shook her head. If money fixed everything, my mom would be fine by now. You've had money for years, but you forgot what it's like to be human. That's what I want you to find again. The words hit harder than any insult. The unsettling silence. For the rest of the drive, the car was filled with silence again, but this time, it wasn't Marcus's silence. It was hers. She had said what she needed to say, and she sat there calmly as if daring him to face it. Marcus leaned back, staring out the window, his mind a storm. He thought about his mother, about his brother, about the countless janitors, cleaners, and workers he had passed in his skyscrapers without a second glance. For the first time in years, the numbers, the deals, the profits, they felt meaningless, and beneath it, all was a gnawing fear that maybe this girl was right, that perhaps he had built an empire of glass, and beneath it was the same cracked foundation he had come from. The drive doesn't end. Marcus expected the car to head straight toward his penthouse, but as if guided by some unspoken plan, Daniel took a different turn. They were driving deeper into the neighborhoods Marcus hadn't seen in decades. Ariana finally spoke again. You should see where we live. Marcus stiffened. That's not necessary. It is, she replied firmly. You can't understand unless you see it. And before Marcus could object, the car slowed to a stop outside a small, crumbling apartment building. The sight made Marcus's stomach lurch. It looked almost identical to the place he grew up. Marcus sat back in the leather seat of his limousine, the city lights flickering past the tinted windows. The little girl's voice still rang in his ears, sharp, unfiltered, and fearless. Shut up, she had said. No hesitation, no fear, just raw honesty. For a man who had built his empire on power, control, and respect, it was jarring. Executives trembled at his presence. Journalists softened their questions when they interviewed him. Entire industries bent to his will. Yet here sat a child, maybe no older than 8 or 9, staring him down as though he were nothing more than another adult who needed to be told the truth. Marcus cleared his throat. Do you know who I am? He asked finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority he had used for decades. The girl shrugged, her braids bouncing slightly. You're just some man in a suit. Doesn't matter. Her words were like a pin to his pride, deflating the aura he had wrapped himself in. He leaned back, letting silence fill the space. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't impressed. And for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to scold her. Instead, Marcus studied her. Her clothes were worn, the fabric thinning at the elbows. Her sneakers had mismatched laces, one fraying so severely it looked like it would snap at any moment. Yet her eyes held fire, fierce, defiant, and unyielding. The driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, unsure if he should intervene. But Marcus lifted a hand, signaling silence. He wanted to see where this was going. "What's your name?" Marcus asked carefully. The girl looked out the window. "Ava," she said softly, almost as if she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing. "Ava," Marcus repeated, the name heavy on his tongue. "And why exactly do you think I should shut up?" Ava turned to him, and for the first time, he saw something behind the bravado, something raw and fragile. "Because you were complaining," she said. "Talking about how hard your day was. Like you're the only one who's tired, the only one who has problems. My mom works 3 jobs. She doesn't complain. She doesn't get to." Marcus froze. The words cut deeper than he expected. He had indeed been muttering under his breath earlier, frustrated by the endless board meetings and calls. Complaints, he never thought twice about. But from Ava's perspective, his problems must have seemed ridiculous. "Your mom works 3 jobs?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Ava nodded, her expression tightening. "Yeah, and today she collapsed at work. That's why I'm here. They said we needed a ride to the hospital and your car was the only one around." The words hit Marcus like a stone. Suddenly, the pieces shifted. This wasn't just some random encounter. This was a collision of worlds. The wealthy CEO who rarely looked down from his glass tower, and the child carrying the weight of survival on her small shoulders. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "What does your mother do?" Ava's jaw clenched. "She cleans offices. Maybe even one of yours. I don't know. She leaves when it's dark, comes home when it's dark. And when she's home, she's so tired she can barely stand." The car fell silent again, but this time the silence was suffocating. Marcus looked out at the cityscape, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. How many times had he passed by women like Ava's mother? Women pushing cleaning carts, through marble lobbies, invisible to the men in suits who walked past them. He remembered the polished floors of his skyscraper, the faint smell of disinfectant in the mornings. He had never thought about the people behind it. The limousine pulled to a stop outside the hospital. The driver opened the door, and Marcus followed Ava inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the waiting room filled with exhausted faces. Marcus felt out of place in his tailored suit. But Ava walked with familiarity, as though this wasn't her first visit. They reached the reception desk, where a nurse looked up. "Family of Denise Carter?" Ava nodded quickly. "I'm her daughter." "Is she okay?" The nurse gave a sympathetic smile. "She's stable, but she needs rest. Overexertion and dehydration. We'll keep her for observation overnight." Relief washed over Ava's small frame, and she exhaled shakily. Marcus, however, stood still, his mind racing. Denise Carter. The name etched itself into his memory. They were led to a small hospital room. Inside, a woman lay on the bed, IV connected to her arm, her breathing shallow but steady. Her face was lined with fatigue, her skin pale under the harsh lights. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a pang of guilt, sharp and undeniable. Ava rushed to her mother's side, holding her hand tightly. "Mama, I'm here." Denise stirred, opening her eyes slowly. When she saw Marcus standing at the foot of the bed, confusion flickered across her face. "Who?" Before Marcus could answer, Ava babbled. "He gave us a ride, Mama. That's all." Denise gave a weak nod, her eyes closing again. Marcus felt like an intruder in this intimate moment, yet he couldn't leave. Something about the scene demanded his presence. He watched as Ava smoothed her mother's blanket, whispering soft reassurances. It was a role reversal, a child comforting the parent, a young girl forced to grow up too soon. Marcus's throat tightened. He thought of his mother, long gone. who had once worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. He remembered sitting in the dark, waiting for her to come home, the fear that maybe she wouldn't. And yet, somewhere along the way, he had buried those memories. Success had erased the echoes of his struggles, replacing them with boardrooms and stock reports. But now, standing in this hospital room, the past clawed its way back. He sat down in a chair by the wall, his usually perfect posture faltering. Ava glanced at him suspiciously. "Why are you still here?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know. Maybe it was guilt. Perhaps it was recognition. Perhaps it was the feeling that for the first time in years, he was seeing something real. "I just wanted to make sure your mom is okay," he said finally. Ava studied him for a long moment, then turned back to her mother. She didn't say thank you. She didn't smile. But she didn't tell him to leave either. For Marcus, that was enough. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the stiff hospital chair, the sterile smell of disinfectant clinging to the air. Ava had curled, up on the side of her mother's bed, one small hand still clutching Denise's fingers. Her eyes fluttered as exhaustion tugged at her, but her grip never loosened. The sight tugged at Marcus in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had seen billion-dollar deals collapse. He had faced boardroom betrayals and hostile takeovers. But none of it unsettled him the way this little girl's unyielding love for her mother did. The nurse entered quietly to check Denise's vitals. Marcus stood and stepped into the hallway to give them space. His phone buzzed, an endless stream of emails, stock updates, and missed calls. For years, he had thrived on the chaos, the constant demands of being CEO. But at that moment, it all felt hollow. He stared at the screen until a message from his assistant caught his eye. Reminder, press conference tomorrow at 9 a.m. Investors expect reassurance after last quarter's losses. Your statement is crucial. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw tightening. The empire he had built demanded his attention. Yet here he was, standing in a hospital corridor, waiting for a janitor he had never met to recover. As he leaned against the wall, he overheard two nurses chatting near the desk. "She's been here before," one said quietly. "Denise Carter, always working herself to exhaustion. Single mom, barely makes enough to keep a roof over their head." "Yeah," the other replied. "I don't know how she does it. Some of these women break their backs cleaning offices for people who don't even know their names." The words struck Marcus like a hammer. People who don't even know their names. He had signed thousands of contracts, built skyscrapers, managed entire industries. But had he ever once asked the name of the women scrubbing his office floors at midnight? The memories came unbidden. He was 12 years old again, sitting on a milk crate outside a laundromat, waiting for his mother to finish her shift. She had worn the same tired smile every night, assuring him that things would get better. He had promised himself then that he would rise above it, that he would never live in poverty again, and he had. But in doing so, he had buried the very world that shaped him. When Marcus re-entered the room, Ava's sharp eyes flicked toward him. "Why do you keep standing there like you care?" she asked bluntly. Marcus hesitated. "Because I do care." Ava narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Men in suits don't care. They just walk past us like we're invisible. Like we don't matter." Her words were a blade, and Marcus felt the cut. She wasn't wrong. He had walked past people like her mother day after day, never sparing a thought. "I used to be invisible too," Marcus said quietly. Ava tilted her head, skeptical. "You?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice low. "I grew up with nothing. My mom worked just as hard as yours does. But I forgot. I forgot what it felt like." For the first time, Ava didn't shoot back a retort. She studied him, as though trying to decide if he was lying. "Then why don't you help people like her?" she finally asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. What excuse could he give? That he was too busy? That his empire mattered more? None of it sounded right, not even to himself. "I don't have a good answer," he admitted, surprising even himself. Ava frowned, looking back at her mother. "Then maybe you should find one." Her words were simple, but they struck deeper than any investor's critique or board member's accusation ever had. Later that night, Denise stirred awake. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled weakly at Ava before glancing at Marcus again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy. Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I didn't do anything. You stayed," Denise said softly. "Most people wouldn't." The humility in her tone was unbearable. Marcus had entire cities bowing to his influence. Still, this woman, this exhausted mother, was grateful simply because he had stayed in a chair for a few hours. He left the hospital in the early morning hours, the city still dark and quiet. But sleep never came. Ava's words echoed in his head. "Then maybe you should find one." For the first time in years, Marcus felt something unfamiliar. Shame. Not the fleeting embarrassment of a failed deal, but the deep, gnawing kind that comes from realizing you've lived wrong for too long. The next day, Marcus sat at the press conference, cameras flashing in his face. He adjusted his tie, the script prepared by his PR team resting on the podium. Investors waited for him to reassure them, to promise growth and profits. But as he opened his mouth, Denise's weary face flashed in his mind. Ava's fire-filled eyes burned into his memory. Instead of following the script, Marcus spoke from somewhere deeper. "Yes, last quarter was challenging," he began, his voice steady. "But growth isn't just about numbers, it's about people. And I've realized something. Our company has been measuring success the wrong way. We've been blind to the very people who keep our world running." Reporters exchanged surprised glances. His executives stiffened. But Marcus didn't stop. "There are workers, cleaners, janitors, staff, who are the backbone of our offices. People who work while we sleep, people who are invisible to us. That changes now." He paused, letting the words settle. "Starting today, we will implement new policies, better wages, healthcare support, and scholarships for their children. Because no one should have to collapse in a hospital just for trying to survive." Gasps rippled through the room. Flashbulbs exploded as reporters shouted questions. But Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. For the first time, his empire wasn't just about him. It was about Ava, about Denise, about every invisible worker he had ignored. The press conference ended in chaos. Reporters swarmed the stage, investors called his phone non-stop, and social media exploded with hashtags. Half the world praised Marcus for his sudden compassion. The other half accused him of making an emotional stunt to distract from financial losses. By the time Marcus returned to his office, his executive board was waiting, every face tight with disapproval. "Marcus," growled Howard, his CFO. "What in God's name was that performance?" "It wasn't a performance," Marcus replied evenly, loosening his tie. "It was the truth." Howard slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "The truth? Do you know what your little speech did to our stock value in the last 2 hours? We've dropped 4%. Investors are panicking. They don't want you promising scholarships and health care. They want profits." Another executive, Cynthia, leaned forward, her tone icy. "We're not a charity, Marcus. We're a corporation. Suppose you want to donate personally, fine. But you cannot drag the company down this path." Marcus stood at the head of the boardroom table, staring at the faces that had once been his allies. For years, he had been the sharpest, the coldest among them. But now, their words sounded hollow. "So what you're saying," Marcus said slowly, "is that we keep building on the backs of people who can barely feed their children, just so our stockholders can buy another yacht?" Cynthia crossed her arms. "I'm saying that if you continue on this crusade, we'll have no choice but to call an emergency vote." The implication hung heavy in the room, a vote to remove him as CEO. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt fear. Not of losing money, but of losing control of the empire he had built from scratch. That evening, he drove to the hospital again, exhaustion etched into his features. Denise was awake this time, sitting up weakly while Ava fed her soup from a plastic container. When Ava saw him, her expression hardened. "You came back?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I came back." Denise smiled faintly. "How's the world treating you, Mr. CEO?" Marcus chuckled humorlessly. "Let's just say, not everyone likes change." Denise studied him, her eyes tired but kind. "People resist change until they see it's possible. Don't let them break you." Her words gave Marcus strength. But as he looked at the frail woman in the hospital bed, he realized change wasn't just about policies or press conferences. It was about survival, for families like hers. He glanced at Ava, who was watching him with cautious curiosity. "I made some promises today," Marcus said slowly, "but keeping them won't be easy. Powerful people want me to back down." Ava set the empty soup cup aside and crossed her arms. "So? Are you going to back down?" Her challenge was sharp, fearless. Marcus almost smiled. She reminded him of himself at her age. Angry, defiant, unwilling to accept defeat. "No," Marcus said firmly, "I'm not." 2 days later, the media storm reached its peak. News anchors debated his motives, analysts predicted financial ruin, and headlines screamed about the CEO who lost his mind. Protesters gathered outside his headquarters, some demanding higher wages, others mocking him with signs that read, "Sell dreams, not sympathy." Inside the boardroom, tension snapped like a whip. "This is unsustainable," Howard barked. "We've scheduled the emergency vote for tomorrow. Step down gracefully, Marcus, and you might still keep your dignity." Marcus rose from his chair, his voice like steel. "My dignity doesn't come from you. It comes from knowing that for once in my life, I'm doing something that matters." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Howard shook his head. "We'll see how much that matters when you're out of a job." That night, Marcus drove without direction, his mind clouded with uncertainty. For the first time in years, doubt clawed at him. What if he lost everything? What if his empire crumbled? As he pulled into a quiet street, he realized where he was, outside the small, rundown apartment building where Denise and Ava lived. He had never seen it before, but something in him had guided him there. Through a lit window, he could see Ava sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over school books. Denise was lying on the couch, coughing softly. The sight twisted something in Marcus's chest. He had the power to change this, not just for them, but for thousands of families like them. But doing so might cost him everything he had built. Once Marcus knew the stakes weren't just financial, they were human. The next morning, the board convened for the emergency vote. Marcus walked into the room with his head high, though his future was anything but certain. As the votes were called one by one, he braced himself for the inevitable betrayal. Howard voted against him. Cynthia voted against him. One by one, the tally stacked against him. But before the final vote could be cast, the boardroom doors burst open. A group of employees, janitors, cleaners, cafeteria workers, stood in the doorway, led by none other than Ava. The room fell silent. Ava's small voice cut through the tension. "He's the only one who sees us, the only one who cares if my mom makes it home alive after work." Marcus's heart pounded. He hadn't asked them to come. But here they were, his living proof that his fight mattered. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their carefully controlled expressions faltering. Reporters, tipped off, swarmed the hallway outside, cameras flashing as word spread. For the first time, Marcus realized he wasn't standing alone. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Ava's words hung in the air like a challenge none of the executives could ignore. Howard was the first to break it. "Who let these people in here? This is a private board meeting, not a..." "Not a what?" Ava shot back, her voice steady. not a place for the people who keep your offices clean. Who makes sure you don't step over trash every morning? My mom has worked for this company for 10 years. You never even learned her name. A few gasps echoed around the room. Cameras from the hallway zoomed in, catching every second. Marcus stood still, his hands on the edge of the table, his gaze fixed on the girl who had once told him to shut up. Ava turned toward him. You said you weren't going to back down. Prove it. Howard slammed his fist against the table. This is outrageous. Security. No. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone froze. They're staying. The boardroom erupted. Some executives shouted about protocol, others muttered about PR disasters. But Marcus raised a hand, and slowly the noise died down. You wanted a reason to believe me? Marcus said, looking around at the people who had the power to strip him of everything. There they are, the backbone of this company. You can fire me today if you want, but understand this. Without them, there is no us. Howard sneered. Fine words, Marcus, but words don't pay dividends. No, Marcus said. Actions do, and I intend to act. At that exact moment, Marcus's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He glanced down, his heart tightening when he saw the caller ID. Hospital. He stepped out of the room, answering with trembling hands. Hello? The nurse's voice was urgent. Mr. Reed, it's Denise Johnson's case. She's gone into critical condition. We need consent for an emergency procedure. Are you her contact? Marcus froze, his breath catching. He wasn't family. He wasn't legally connected to them. He looked back at the boardroom door where Ava still stood. No, Marcus whispered, but her daughter is. I'll get her there. He rushed back into the room. Ava, we need to go. Now. Ava's eyes widened in panic. Is it Mom? Yes, Marcus said, already pulling out his keys. Come on. The black sedan tore through traffic, Marcus gripping the wheel while Ava sat in the passenger seat, hands clasped tight, tears running down her face. She was fine last night. Ava whispered, her voice breaking. She said she was feeling better. Marcus swallowed hard. Sometimes things change fast. But she's strong, Ava. Don't lose hope. Ava turned to him, her face wet with tears but burning with defiance. Hope doesn't pay hospital bills. That's what you people never understand. You give speeches, you talk about charity, but when it's real, when it's life or death, we're alone. Marcus's throat tightened. For once, he didn't have an answer. He only pressed harder on the accelerator. They reached the hospital in record time. Ava bolted out of the car and ran inside, Marcus close behind. Doctors and nurses rushed Denise toward surgery, machines beeping frantically. Ava tried to follow, but a nurse held her back. I'm sorry. You can't go in. Please, that's my mom, Ava sobbed, struggling against the grip. Marcus stepped forward. Let her stay. The nurse hesitated. Sir, only one can accompany the patient. Who's her legal guardian? Ava's tear-streaked face turned to Marcus, pleading silently. Marcus didn't think twice. She is, he said firmly, pointing to Ava. She's her daughter. Let her in. The nurse nodded and guided Ava inside. Marcus was left in the hallway, standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. For the first time, the man who had ruled boardrooms, dictated stock markets, and bent entire industries to his will, felt utterly powerless. Back at headquarters, the board vote continued without him. Howard presided smugly, announcing, in the absence of Mr. Reed, we will conclude the proceedings. All in favor of his removal, raise your hands. Hands went up, one after another, the tally stacking, a clean majority. The boardroom doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't Ava. It was Marcus's assistant, breathless and carrying a live-streaming phone. You might want to see this, she said, placing the phone on the table. On the screen, live from the hospital, news reporters covered Marcus standing outside the emergency ward. His head was bowed, his usually sharp suit wrinkled, his expression raw and unguarded. The reporter's voice rang out, The millionaire CEO who shocked the world with his speech yesterday is now at the bedside of one of his employees. Sources confirm the woman, Denise Johnson, is in critical condition. Her daughter Ava is inside with her now. This isn't about profits anymore, it's about people. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Their vote suddenly seemed less secure, less righteous, under the weight of public eyes. In the waiting room, Marcus sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. He thought about every decision that had brought him here, the deals he had cut, the people he had stepped on, the lives he had ignored. For years, he had built walls to keep the world out. But Ava's voice, Denise's frail smile, they had broken through. A doctor finally emerged, pulling off his mask. The surgery was successful. She's stable for now. Marcus exhaled deeply, his chest loosening for the first time in hours. Ava stumbled out moments later, her face red but relieved. "She made it," she whispered. "She's going to be okay." Without thinking, she threw her arms around Marcus. For a brief, fragile moment, he held her, this little girl who had once told him to shut up and now had given him a reason to fight. Meanwhile, across the city, news anchors replayed the footage again and again. The narrative had shifted. Marcus was no longer just a reckless CEO. He was a man willing to risk everything for the people at the bottom. Public pressure mounted. Thousands of employees signed petitions supporting his reforms. Social media was flooded with stories from workers sharing how his policies could change their lives. By the time Marcus returned to headquarters the next day, the board could barely look him in the eye. Howard cleared his throat. "We reconsidered the vote. Given the overwhelming public support and the media's current framing, we believe it's in the company's best interest for you to remain as CEO." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "Good, because I wasn't going anywhere." The boardroom no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a tomb of guilt. Executives shuffled papers nervously, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Howard, once bold and arrogant, sat rigid, his jaw tight, his pride cracked. Marcus stood at the head of the table, not with swagger, but with gravity. His voice was steady, almost quiet. "I don't care about your votes anymore. What I care about is fixing what we broke. This company was built on people like Denise Johnson, and if you think I'll let it continue bleeding them dry, you've got another thing coming." Silence, not a single challenge. Marcus walked out, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. Scene 1, hospital recovery. Back at the hospital, Denise lay in her bed, pale but alive. Machines beeped softly beside her, steady and reassuring. Ava sat by her side, holding her mother's hand tightly. When Marcus entered the room, Denise's eyes fluttered open. A weak smile tugged at her lips. "You came," she whispered. "I should have come sooner," Marcus admitted, pulling a chair beside her bed. "I should have seen you years ago." Denise squeezed his hand lightly. "You've got a chance to make it right. Don't waste it." Her words carried more weight than any board vote, any shareholder demand. Ava watched them silently, her expression softening. For the first time, she didn't see Marcus Reed, the tycoon. She saw Marcus, the man, flawed, broken, but trying. Scene 2. Marcus faces himself. That night, Marcus returned home. The penthouse windows stretched high above the city, reflecting the neon glow. But for once, the view felt empty. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, then stopped. Instead, he walked to the balcony, letting the wind hit his face. In the silence, memories rushed back. His father working double shifts, his mother begging for a doctor they couldn't afford, the humiliation of being invisible. He whispered to himself, "I became the very thing I swore I'd fight." The glass remained untouched. He picked up a notebook instead, scribbling down ideas: wages, healthcare, housing benefits. Real change. For the first time in years, Marcus Reed worked through the night, not for profits, but for people. Scene 3. The reforms weeks later, The company unveiled unprecedented reforms, living wages for all employees, free healthcare packages for janitorial and service staff, scholarship programs for employees' children, employee council to give workers a voice at the top. The news made headlines across the country. Protesters who once held picket signs against Marcus now carried banners of support. Inside the offices, janitors and clerks walked with pride, their voices finally heard. One worker whispered as Marcus passed by, "He actually did it." For Marcus, it wasn't about applause. It was about redemption. Scene 4. Ava's growth. Meanwhile, Ava changed, too. She balanced school with caring for her mother, who was slowly recovering. But something had shifted inside her. Courage. She started a blog, sharing her family's story. Soon it spread across social media, reaching thousands of people who felt unseen. She wrote about dignity, fairness, and hope. One evening, Marcus found her typing furiously at the hospital lobby. "You've got a voice," he said, peering at her screen. "Don't ever let anyone silence it." Ava smirked. "Funny. That's what I told you the first day we met." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "And I'm glad you did." Scene 5. Howard's fall. Howard, however, wasn't finished. Bitter over losing control, he tried undermining Marcus, spreading rumors to shareholders. But the tide of public support was too strong. Finally, Marcus confronted him privately. "You tried to bury me," Marcus said, his tone calm. "But all you did was bury yourself," Howard sneered. "You'll regret this. Compassion doesn't keep empires alive." Marcus leaned forward. "Neither does greed." Within months, Howard was voted out, disgraced, his legacy tarnished. Scene 6. Denise's words. The day Denise finally returned home from the hospital, Marcus and Ava visited with flowers and groceries. Denise, frail but smiling, looked around her small apartment and then at Marcus. "You're making changes out there," she said. "But don't forget, it starts in here, in how you treat the person right in front of you." Marcus nodded. "I won't forget again." She reached for Ava's hand, then Marcus's. "You both have fire. Use it to light the way, not burn the world down." Scene 7. Legacy. Months turned into a year. Marcus's company became a model for corporate responsibility. Other CEOs mocked him at first, but soon many were forced to follow his lead or lose public trust. At a press conference, Marcus stood with workers beside him, not behind him. Ava was there too, documenting every moment. When a reporter asked, "Mr. Reed, what made you change?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "A little girl told me to shut up." And she was right. The room burst into laughter, but Ava's eyes shone with pride. Scene 8. Full circle. One evening, Marcus revisited Denise. She sat on her balcony sipping tea wrapped in a blanket. Ava was at her side, reading out loud from her latest blog post. Marcus leaned on the railing, listening. Denise looked at him, her voice soft. "You found your way back, Marcus. Don't lose it." He nodded. "I won't." The city lights sparkled below them, not as symbols of power or wealth, but as reminders of the lives they represented. For the first time, Marcus felt whole, not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. Final message, the narrator's voice closes. This story is not just about one man's redemption or one family's survival. It's about the choice we all face, to look away or to stand up, to build walls or to build bridges. In the end, kindness isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength we can offer. And sometimes it only takes one voice to change the course of an empire.